Hey guys, this particular story may be hard to believe because of its rather unusual and horrific nature. But the viewer who sent it in insisted it was true. With that being said, sit back, grab your snacks, and make sure the lights are on unless you're feeling bold. Let's get into it. Katrina was a stay at home mom, and her husband worked as a trucker, so she was often alone for long stretches of time. Katrina and her husband had three kids. The family lived out in the countryside away from the general city area. Katrina told me that she doesn't know how long the entity had been attached to one of her sons, but she said she first noticed it whilst doing laundry. So while she was doing laundry, she went to her son's room, and we'll call him Brian. And while she was gathering his dirty laundry, she noticed some family photos that were on Brian's nightstand. Katrina hadn't known that Brian had his own personal photos aside from the family's photos, which are on display in their living room. In Brian's photos, Katrina noticed a strange figure always in the background, but it was too hard for her to make out, so she figured it might just be bad lighting whenever the photo happened to be taken. So eventually, Katrina gets back to the laundry and the regular tasks she does throughout the day. And she doesn't even think about the photos because it didn't seem like anything serious or anything concerning. Brian and his brother and sister arrived back home after school, and whilst the brother and sister happily greet their mother Katrina, Brian wasn't as excited and just went immediately to his room. Katrina, thinking maybe Brian is getting picked on at school, thought it was best to give him some space until later that night when she could talk to him in private. Brian, however, never came down to join the family for dinner, and then, of course, bedtime came soon afterwards. So Katrina goes to Brian's room now and sees Brian taking more photos, but this time it was odd that he was taking photos in the dark and photos of the walls and the ceilings. Katrina innocently asked Brian why he's taking photos of the walls and the ceiling and why in the dark. It's at this time that Brian says something to Katrina, something chilling. Brian said to his mother that he was taking photos of the walls and the ceiling because his friend wanted him to do that. And it's dark because his friend likes the dark. Katrina, however, did not see anything wrong at this time and only thought Brian perhaps had an imaginary friend, just like so many other kids. So she played along and said to Brian that he should take more photos of him and his friend, but this time together. Brian got excited and goes to the wall beside his window and takes a selfie photo. And when he does, the flash goes off, and Katrina sees Brian's friend. Brian's friend, according to what Katrina told me, was a tall, slender, pale, demonic looking woman next to Brian. Katrina screams and immediately turns on the lights. And when she does, the woman is gone. And Brian asks why she turned them on. Katrina grabs Brian to leave the room, but Brian says that he doesn't want to leave his friend. She pulls Brian out of the room, but suddenly all the lights in the entire house shut off, and the house is plunged into darkness. Brian escapes from Katrina's grasp and runs into the darkness. Katrina screams out for Brian, but nothing. The other two siblings come out of their rooms and ask what's going on. But before she could even answer, the demonic woman grabs Brian's brother and drags him away. His brother screams but quickly becomes silent. Katrina runs off after her son, but since she can't see anything, the house is so dark, she ends up falling downstairs and becomes unconscious. At this time, the father returns home and enters the house. He tries to turn on the lights, but none come on, so he thinks the breakers must have just tripped. He begins to make his way to the garage where he can reflip the breakers, but he can faintly make out a shape in the kitchen. He thought it was his wife Katrina, so he calls out to her as he walks up to the figure. He pulls out his phone for a flashlight, and when he does, and he turns on the flashlight, he sees the figure. But it's not his wife. It's the demonic woman feasting on his son, Brian's brother. The dad screams in terror and drops his phone. The next moment, his screams ring out in the house and wake up the unconscious Katrina. Katrina comes to and gets up and heads to the kitchen, where she finds her husband terribly marred and disfigured. She falls over in sadness and screams. Katrina gets woken up by her husband in bed saying that she was screaming and crying. Katrina realizes that it was all just a dream. And the next day, Katrina thinks about why she may have had that disturbing dream. But nothing easily comes to mind until she remembers that 20 years ago when she was in middle school, she played with a Ouija board with some friends. It was during this Ouija board session that Katrina saw a ghastly woman that resembled a woman from her dream. That was Katrina's story, and it goes to show the importance of not dabbling in the demonic occult. If you guys have any stories, make sure to send them in, and it could be our next episode. See you guys later.